Hey everyone, this is Tom, and in this video I want to show you how you can add a bit of life to your programmed MIDI clips by humanizing them. So a big problem with electronic music is often you are programming things in with a mouse, and you'll end up with something that looks a little bit like this, where all your notes are exactly on the grid and they all have exactly the same velocity. If you think about a real musician, no musician ever plays all their notes with exactly the same velocity, and not even the best musicians in the world will play every single note exactly on the grid. In fact, most musicians will actually intentionally play slightly off the grid to add a particular feel to their music. Some electronic genres do benefit from having these very rigid and static programmed MIDI patterns, but for other genres you might want to add a little bit of humanity to your MIDI clips. So we could of course go in and manually edit each one of these MIDI notes, adjusting their velocities and offsetting their timing slightly, but that's going to be quite a lot of work. So what we're going to look at in this video is a quick way to apply a little bit of humanization to all your MIDI clips very easily. So let's have a listen to what this drum beat actually sounds like. So you can hear that all the notes are at exactly the same level, and it sounds very static and a little bit lifeless. So the first thing we're going to do is adjust the velocities of our notes so that we get a little bit more randomization of the volume of each note. So to do this, we'll go to Live's MIDI effects, and we're going to grab the Velocity MIDI effect. Now, the Velocity MIDI effect lets us do a number of different things to our velocity, but for now, all we want to focus on is this control called random. And what that does is applies a random amount of velocity variation to each note. So just to show you exactly what it does, I'm going to set it to the maximum so you can really hear the effect that it's having. So you can hear how the velocities of our notes are all over the place. So what works a little bit better is setting it down to about somewhere between about 10 and 20. Let's go with 15. So you can hear how that adds very subtle variations to our velocity that starts to make it sound a little bit more alive. Now, an important thing to be aware of here is that this is only going to work if you're using an instrument or a sampler that is velocity sensitive. If your samples themselves aren't actually velocity sensitive, it's not really going to make too much difference. So for example, here I'm using a drum rack, and each one of these drum hits is using Live's sampler device. In the global settings, I have this control here, which affects my volume depending on what velocity is coming in. So for example, if I set this to 0 for my hi-hat, you'll hear how my velocity randomization is having no effect. If I set it back to 50%, there you can hear it's affecting the velocity again. Depending on what synth or sampler you might be using, you might also be able to affect other parameters of your sound using the velocity as well. So for example, in Sampler, I have this MIDI tab, which lets me affect various parameters of my sound using MIDI information. So here I can use my velocity to affect something like my pitch. So if you think about a hi-hat and a real drummer playing a hi-hat, they're never going to hit the cymbal in exactly the same place every time. And what this does is it adds slight pitch variations to each hit. So again, to demonstrate this one, I'm going to set it all the way to the max. And you can hear how we get quite wild pitch variations. But if we set this to a subtler amount, we get more subtle pitch variations that start to add to this natural feel. So the next element of humanizing our clips is affecting the timing of our MIDI notes. The easiest way to affect the timing of notes in Live is to use grooves. To find our grooves, we can go to our packs, go to the core library, go into our folder called Swing and Groove, and find a particular groove that we want to work with. I'm going to grab the 16th note swing 99% groove, and to apply it, I can just drag it directly onto the MIDI clip. I'll then open up my groove pool and set the timing of the groove to 0% for now. So the groove is actually not having any effect, and if I play this clip, you can hear it sounds exactly as it did before. If I start increasing the timing amount here, what's going to happen is it's going to start applying some swing to my beat. So swing is already one good way of adding a little bit of feel and a bit more groove to your parts. Most real drummers will usually play with even just a little bit of swing to add a bit of feel to the parts that they play. So this is a really nice way of adding a bit more of a human element to your MIDI patterns. Another thing that we can do with our grooves is apply a timing randomization. So I'm going to turn off the timing of the actual groove itself, and I'll turn the randomization up to 100% just so you can hear the effect that it has. So you can hear how I get this really sloppy sounding drum beat that's just completely out of time. But again, we want to be a little bit more subtle with this. So I'm going to set it to about 20%. And we get these little slight variations in the timing that, although they're subtle, they do add to that kind of human element of the sound. We can now bring back a little bit of our groove as well, so we can combine the element of randomization and the groove to get the effect of both. Cool, so let's hear the before and after of our MIDI clip. So here's before. So although it's very subtle, you can hear that it adds a little bit more life to your drum pattern. Now, you really do want to be quite subtle with these because you can start to sound a bit out of time and a little bit wonky if it gets a bit too much. But your ear is actually really good at subconsciously picking up on those small variations that will just make the music feel a little bit more alive. To demonstrate this, just with one more example, I've also got a piano loop here. And if we look at this MIDI clip, you'll see again all the notes fall exactly on the grid and they're all exactly the same velocity. So it's very static, a little bit lifeless. So let's apply the same effect to our piano. We can just drag this existing groove from our groove pool onto our MIDI clip. And we'll go into our MIDI effects and grab the Velocity MIDI effect. Let's go with something like 20 on the randomization. And again, you can hear the subtle variations in the velocity of our piano. So there you have it. That's a quick way of adding a little bit of a human element to your MIDI clips to make them sound a little bit more alive. The last thing to mention is that the Velocity MIDI effect, because it's a MIDI effect, lives on the track and will affect any clips that you might have on the track. So if I were to have multiple clips on this particular track, the Velocities randomization would be applying to all of them, whereas grooves are applied on a clip-by-clip basis. So if I had multiple clips on my track here, I would have to apply the groove individually to each one of them to get the timing effects of it as well. Cool, so that's it for this video. I hope you learned something useful, and I look forward to hearing your more organic, human sounding music. Thanks for watching.